before the fun-loving, Curry-led dynastic Warriors that went on to win 3 championships in 5 years, and even before the We Believe Warriors, who pulled off one of the greatest upsets in sports history, the Golden State Warriors were one of the worst teams in the NBA. For a near 15-year stretch, the franchise only had 1 playoff appearance and had a bottom 3 win percentage at a point in time in which the NBA was expanding. And this level of losing was head-scratching to say the least. Entering the 90s, the Warriors had a very interesting roster that easily could have translated to wins, as they had a potentially powerful trio featuring Chris Mullin, Tim Hardaway, and Mitch Richmond. But unfortunately, instead of this being the beginning of a great run, it was the beginning of the worst stretch in franchise history. And of course, as we all know, when a team is that bad for that long, instant red flags goes up on their draft selections, and the Warriors are no exception. In a 14-year span, Golden State wasted 15 first-round picks, 12 of which were in the lottery. 9 of those 15 were top 10 selections, which is astonishing in and of itself, but once you stop to realize how many all-time great players could have been playing for the Warriors, yeah, it definitely warrants its own video. We begin with the draft class of 93, but before we get into it, let me give you a little bit of backstory. Remember that tantalizing trio that I referenced in the intro of Mitch Richmond, Tim Hardaway, and Chris Mullin? Well, they disbanded prematurely. The reason for this is because Don Nelson, who was not only the coach but also the general manager for the Warriors, felt pressure to bring along some interior presence for a team that struggled with that aspect of basketball. So right before the 91-92 season began, Mitch Richmond was traded to the Sacramento Kings, and in return the Warriors received Billy Owens, a 6'8" rookie power forward that you may not be aware of, indicating how poor of a transaction this was long term for the Warriors. However, in the immediate future, it did seem like this was going to be the key for the Warriors to take the next step, because by the end of the 92 season, Golden State finished with a record of 55-27, which at the time was the second best regular season record in franchise history. Unfortunately, the success was short-lived, thanks to the Warriors being upsetted in the first round by a Sonics team led by Shawn Kemp, who averaged 16 rebounds. And oh yeah, Kemp gave us one of the greatest in-game dunks of all time during that playoff series.
Right up into the alley, power slam, tomahawk jam!
So yeah, Golden State still needed some interior presence, which brings us to the 93 draft class. After a disappointing 92-93 season, which essentially was just filled with a lot of injuries and too high of expectations on rookie guard Latrell Sprewell, the Golden State Warriors entered the 93 draft with the 3rd overall pick. Now, recognizing that Billy Owens wasn't going to provide the interior presence that this team needed, the Warriors decided to go for another big man in the draft. And luckily, the class of 93 had some prominent names in Chris Webber and Sean Bradley. But unfortunately, both players would be selected with the first 2 picks, leaving the Warriors with a 6'7" guard by the name of Penny Hardaway, which honestly is a pretty good consolation prize. However, the Warriors were desperate for some type of interior presence. So desperate that it was easy to take advantage of, which is exactly what the Orlando Magic did. So on draft night, the Orlando Magic sent over their 1st overall pick in Chris Webber, and in return, the Warriors sent over not only Penny Hardaway, but 3 first-round picks. Now, this transaction was risky for several reasons, the most important one being the Warriors did not have the financial capability to properly compensate Webber. See, unlike in today's NBA, rookies back in the day did not get signed to a traditional rookie scale contract. They had the right to ask practically whatever they wanted to, and with the Warriors already over the salary cap, there was a limitation on how much they could offer Chris Webber. Now, to prove that they were dealing in good faith, they gave Webber a bunch of incentives as well as a long-term contract to make sure he felt comfortable signing with the team. And they also gave him a player option after his first year concluded, which is something that would quickly bite them in the backside. Because Webber, who was already pessimistic about playing in Golden State, became even more sour on the concept once he became a bit more familiar with Don Nelson and his quote-unquote tough love ideology of coaching. Now, shout out to Secret Base because they did a great video breaking down the beef history between Don Nelson and Chris Webber, but in short, the relationship between both parties grew so toxic that by the end of the season, despite the fact that the Warriors won 50 games, and despite the fact that Chris Webber would go on to win Rookie of the Year, C-Webb wanted out. And he wasn't willing to change his mind even when the Warriors drafted 6'11" Clifford Rozier with the 16th overall pick during the 94 draft, which would then allow C-Webb to play his natural position at the power forward spot. So with C-Webb making demands and him having a player option, the Warriors had no other choice but to trade him. So on November 17th, 1994, the Warriors traded Chris Webber to the Washington Bullets, and in return they received Tom Gugliotta and 3 first-round picks. 2 of which, the 98 and 96 first-round pick, belonging to the Golden State Warriors, that the Washington Bullets received while interacting with a transaction from the Orlando Magic that the Orlando Magic received during the original Chris Webber and Penny Hardaway trade, which in my opinion is a pretty interesting fact because it does shed a little light on what just transpired. Because in short, the Warriors not only gave up the opportunity to keep Penny Hardaway, but eventually were forced to move Chris Webber, and the only thing that they received in return was Tom Gugliotta, who is a significantly worse player than both C-Webb and Penny. And somehow it only gets worse from here. The 94-95 season was riddled with injuries and major changes. Don Nelson stepped down as a general manager and head coach, and injuries completely decimated the roster, which resulted in a 26-56 record, but also resulted with the first overall pick, which was great because the 95 draft class was filled with promising power forwards who had the potential to right the wrong of trading Chris Webber. You had Antonio McDyess, Rasheed Wallace, and one of the greatest power forwards of all time, Kevin Garnett. Unfortunately, with the number 1 overall pick, the Golden State Warriors didn't select any of them, and instead selected a 6'10" power forward out of Maryland by the name of Joe Smith. Now, while doing my research, I couldn't find any specific articles giving any reasons to why the Warriors drafted Joe Smith over Garnett, outside of the fact that, to his credit, Joe Smith had an amazing collegiate career as he ended his time in college averaging 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks, while Kevin Garnett was trying to make the jump straight out of high school. But unfortunately, the safe selection of Joe Smith never panned out in the NBA, as Smith was more so known as a journeyman, while Kevin Garnett would go on to have one of the greatest careers in NBA history. Now in the 95-96 season, there was an improvement, but not by much. Smith was putting up quality numbers, but nothing really special, and quite honestly, nothing all that different from his rookie counterparts. Latrell Sprewell was having a solid season, but not enough to really move the needle, and newly acquired BJ Armstrong forced Tim Hardaway to fight for starting minutes, which really gave the Warriors an excuse to get more accustomed to not having him on the team anymore, which is what they eventually did by the middle of the season by trading him to Miami. By the end of the 95-96 season, the Warriors finished yet again with a losing record, which then gave them another lottery pick. But one can argue that was a great thing. Going into the 96 draft class with the 11th overall pick meant great opportunities were still going to be on the table. Players such as Peja Stojakovic, or Jermaine O'Neal, or one of the greatest point guards of all time in Steve Nash, or one of the greatest players of all time in Kobe Bryant. Unfortunately, the Warriors didn't select any of those players whatsoever, and to make it worse, with the 11th overall pick, the Warriors selected Todd Fuller, another big man. Fuller would go on to have a very, very short NBA career. To be precise, he only played 225 games, of which 23 of them he started, which means that his career didn't come anywhere near close to any of the players who were selected after him. The 96-97 season was more of the same. Questionable play from some of the younger players, Latrell Sprewell putting up really good numbers but not really translating nor moving the needle when it comes to the games in the win column, and Chris Mullin aging even more. By the end of the season, the Warriors finished with a record of 30-52, which resulted in the 8th overall pick. And with it, the Warriors drafted Adonal Foyle, making it the 5th straight year in a row where the Warriors ended the draft night adding a big man to their roster. And that isn't the only tradition that continued. Foyle would go on to have a mediocre career at best, And similar to prior draft classes, the Warriors selected him right before another all-time great player in Tracy McGrady. But yet it still somehow gets worse, because the 97-98 season is when the Warriors hit rock bottom. Chris Mullin was traded to the Indiana Pacers, and in return the Warriors received Eric Dampier. Yes, another young big man, which didn't make any sense whatsoever. During the middle of the year, just 2 years after he was drafted with the #1 overall pick, the Warriors decided to part ways with Joe Smith and sent him to the Philadelphia 76ers, and also Latrell Sprewell was suspended for majority of the season after a physical altercation between him and head coach PJ Carlesimo. The Warriors finished the 98 season with a record of 19-63, which translated to not only the third worst record in franchise history, but also the 5th overall pick in the 98 draft. And this time, the Warriors could not mess it up. They clearly needed a fresh start, a face of a franchise, someone who's going to bring some excitement to this organization. And with the 5th overall pick, they did just that by drafting 6'6" swingman straight out of UNC, half man, half amazing, future Hall of Famer, Vince Carter. Man, great pick for the Warriors. Really going to help them turn it around, bring them some nice wing presence on the team, be a face of the franchise, really turn this. So no, that's right. On draft night, they decided to trade Vince Carter to the Toronto Raptors and in return receive Antoine Jamison. But just as you think it possibly couldn't get worse, oh, it does. Because while the Warriors and Raptors were trading the 2 UNC prospects, just a few draft selections later, with the 9th overall pick, the Milwaukee Bucks selected Dirk Nowitzki. And oh yeah, let me not forget that Paul Pierce was also still available and was selected 10th overall by the Boston Celtics. So major mistakes made by the Warriors during the 98 draft. In the 99 and 2000 draft class, the Warriors didn't have any valuable picks because they just traded them all away. In 99, Golden State had the 10th overall pick, but traded it to the Atlanta Hawks the night before the draft. And in return, they received Mookie Blaylock and the Hawks' first round pick, which was the 21st overall selection. And then on draft night, they then traded down again as they traded Jeff Foster, who was selected with the 21st overall pick, to Indiana for the Pacers' first round pick, which was the 26th overall selection, who turned out to be Vonteego Cummings. Cummings would play fewer than 200 games in the NBA before he was cut out of the league, and Mookie Blaylock was on the wrong side of 30 years old, so he literally just retired a few years after he was traded to the Warriors. While on the other hand, Atlanta, with the Warriors' 10th overall selection, decided to draft 6'2" guard Jason Terry, who had a really respectable career, and probably is someone that the Warriors could have used. Then in 2000, remember that the Warriors' first round pick was given to the Orlando Magic during the Penny Hardaway and Chris Webber transaction, which turned out to be the 5th overall selection, and with it, the Orlando Magic decided to draft Mike Miller. And in the draft pick that the Warriors received from the Bullets during the Chris Webber transaction, they traded months prior to receive Larry Hughes, who they eventually lost in free agency for literally nothing. And somehow it still gets even worse. In the 2001 and 2002 draft classes, the Warriors were just completely unlucky. In 2001, thanks to unfortunate draft odds, the Warriors fell to the 5th overall pick, meaning that they missed out on the opportunity to select future Hall of Famer Pau Gasol. But to the credit of the front office, with the 5th overall selection, the Warriors drafted high-flying sharpshooter swingman in Jason Richardson, who actually had a sneaky good career. Also in the second round, the Warriors selected 6'3" combo guard Gilbert Arenas, who quickly proved that he was a steal of the draft because in his second year in the NBA, he was already averaging 18 points per game. But unfortunately, his time with the Warriors was short-lived. During the 2003 offseason, the Wizards gave a young Gilbert Arenas a 6-year, $60 million contract in which the Warriors could not match because they were already over the salary cap. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, aren't there exceptions that allow the Warriors to go over the salary cap to retain a young player like Gilbert Arenas? Well, in today's league there are, but back in the day, the exception, known as the bird rights, that would allow the Warriors to retain Gilbert Arenas only applied to players who were drafted in the first round. And then in 2002, even though the Warriors were tied with the highest draft odds to get the #1 overall pick, they unfortunately fell to 3rd, meaning that they completely missed out on the opportunity to draft Yao Ming, and they were left with the option of drafting Mike Dunleavy Jr. Now, I could continue all the way to 2006 and continue to point out other draft mistakes from the Warriors. However, I don't really think any of them are worth pointing out, largely because there weren't any all-time great players who were available once the Warriors selected their young prospects, and also, I don't really want to be too harsh to Warrior fans, because that stretch between 1993 to 2002 is a brutal one. But with that being said, people, like you always do, let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Also, if you're interested in other draft timeline videos, on the screen I talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves and how they infamously took 2 players before Stephen Curry, as well as a playlist of other teams in their draft timelines. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.